Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. Wishing you a happy and healthy new year and for better things to come in 2021. New crops are always welcome on farm and tillage growers are generally quick to take them on. Rye is a new crop and it's been grown on farms for the last couple of years with some success. However, as with all crops, there is lessons to be learned on how to get the best from this crop on your farm. In this podcast, we're joined by Ciaran Collins, a tillage specialist, and Conor Kavanagh, a Teagasc advisor in Tipperary, and also Gerard O'Mara, a farmer from Tipperary. I first asked Gerard to give a short description of his farm.
Gerard and Patrick O'Mara, that's my father, we're farming together. We've kind of roughly 200 hectares divided into winter barley, spring barley be the main crop, mostly from malt, and a little bit of winter wheat. Growing a bit of fodder wheat as well, and a bit of oats or flavins. We also have a beef enterprise as well, but we'll be predominantly tillage will be the main name of the game really. So that's where we are.
So you have a good varied kind of cropping scheme out there already. So you obviously have grown a little bit of rye in the past, but why did you decide to get into growing rye?
Well, I tell you, it was after 2018. It was very dry, as you know. And some of our land is light enough. And I was actually speaking to Tim O'Donovan from SeedTech, and he said the spring barley actually was very poor here, both on straw yield and grain yield. And he just said, few people, he said, had tried the rye. And he said it might be of interest to you because it's a fairly good area here for straw, for sales wise. So I tried 14 acres anyway. And yeah, look, that was in 19, and we had it again last year, 20. So we've 2 years under our belt. Yeah, look, it passed out winter wheat the 2 years on yield, and the straw, a lot of straw in it too, which kind of suits what we're at anyway. So it's kind of half replaced a little bit of spring barley, and we've cut back on winter wheat. So, and we've increased our acreage from 14 last year, we're going up to 60 now. So. A little bit of a gamble, but look, we think, as I said, I'll cut back on winter wheat and maybe cut back on a little spring barley as well. So that's kind of where it's fitting in.
Okay, and Gerard, when you talked about the markets for straw, which is obviously quite strong down in Tipperary, but in terms of that market, has it changed? Is it easy enough to market the straw or indeed the grain?
Well, the grain, the first year in 19, there was no interest in it really. Tim O'Donovan, we had to try a bit. I actually kept it myself in 19. I used it myself, and I kept a small bit of it in 20. But last year, I think 2020, dairy goals were very anxious to take the rest of it, which they did. And Plan B are after jumping on the bandwagon now as well. So going forward, I don't think there's going to be an issue with the grain. Straw-wise, very, very similar to 6-row winter barley straw. Very similar to it now. So I don't know, the wheat and straw barley straw really, but I have no problem with anyone anyway, so that's all I know.
And the reports coming back from people who are buying their straw, is it mopping up and bedding pretty much the same, if you like, as barley straw?
I'd say most of the straw, to be honest, that I'm selling is actually for feeding really, and I don't really grow enough wheat and straw to feed, so a lot of those are just feeding barley straw. So I suppose the rye is just fitting in there anyway, so it's not really an issue. So that's where we are at the minute anyway.
Okay, so you obviously have a bit more in for harvest 2021.
I do.
Looking a little bit past that, Gerard, do you think rye is going to be a part of your cropping scheme, for the next 3 or 4 years? Well,
look, the way we kind of look at it is every acre has to stand up for itself, and every crop has to stand up for itself. And like if you were doing an overall, maybe a 5-year average on every crop, winter wheat in particularly, for the cost of growing it, like it was averaging just over 4 tons. Got a few 5 tons from time to time. But like the expenses now, especially this year with the lower tenure gone, I just don't think it's at the races. The rye was coming in a lot cheaper to grow it and yielding better. So I can see, I'm back actually to just over 20 acres of winter wheat. And so we'd have been traditionally, I would have had 150 acres of wheat. That'll tell you where that's gone. So the rye, I think, will be slotting in instead of the wheat. Yeah.
I think that really gives a flavour of your farm and your experience of it. So look, that's great. So, Ciaran, I just want to ask you just a little bit about growing winter rye. Some of it's obviously in the ground at the moment, but is it mostly suitable for winter or spring cultivation, rye in a general sense?
Yeah, Michael, most of the current rye varieties are hybrid winter varieties. So yes, we're talking about autumn planting really. Now the current varieties are capable of delivering very high yields, just as Ger said there, broadly in a range between maybe 10 and 12 tons per hectare. I suppose one thing to note, KPH would generally then maybe 3 or 4 points behind what you might typically get with winter wheat. So yeah, sown in the winter. And then I suppose the other feature of rye then is that it is highly resistant to the take-all fungus. So it is suitable to grow maybe in that sort of take-all slot that you would have in the autumn.
Okay, it's that kind of third, fourth kind of wheat somewhere in there.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe to replace maybe a second wheat, and as Ger said there, even to replace wheat maybe in general in some cases, you know, and I suppose it does give that advantage as well of lengthening that rotation in the autumn, you know, where you can get in another cereal crop maybe before you'd go back to a break crop.
Okay, I just want to just come across to you, Conor, and just ask you about when you're planting winter rye in the autumn, what's the sowing dates for that? Is it clashing with everything else, or is it slightly different?
No, I suppose the big benefit of sowing rye, Michael, is basically you can probably start setting it a small bit earlier than you should your winter barley. You're probably talking around middle of September to the end of October would be suited for setting the crop, which getting it in that small bit earlier than your winter barley, it'll just give you a bit more time, and it's generally going in reasonably good conditions from the middle to end of September, and it gets off to a good start.
And Ciaran, obviously this rye is another cereal crop, but why exactly should a grower decide to throw out winter wheat or oats or indeed barley in preference to rye?
Well, I suppose first of all, it's a bit more crop diversity, you know, which is obviously good in the rotation. And as Ger kind of commented there, I suppose there are lower risks associated with rye, and some we'll say lower disease risks anyway, certainly compared to winter wheat and winter barley. So obviously septoria is an issue in wheat, and rhamolaria is an increasing problem in winter barley with the loss of chlorothalonil. So I think there are that is one big area where farmers might consider rye. And also, like I said earlier on, it does give that opportunity to lengthen that rotation, getting another cereal in maybe before you would go back to a break crop. And I suppose the other one then is, and Ger sort of mentioned it there as well, is certainly it would have a lower cost per ton than other cereals. And I'm not saying that it's a cheap crop to grow, but it would have a lower cost per ton because of its high output.
And so when you say that, because it has, I suppose it is being talked about out there as being the low input crop, you're saying that's not necessarily the case?
No, certainly not. I suppose you'd kind of regard the costs when you look at them, they'd be sort of comparable to winter barley, you know, with higher output. So that would be, and that's higher output in terms of both grain and straw. Like in terms of inputs, we control it'd be very similar to wheat and barley, normally done in the autumn. And like your phosphorus and potassium would be based on offtakes. And given that you have high offtakes, you know, you probably will have slightly increased rates of P and K. Now the nitrogen rates would be less, probably somewhere in the range of maybe 15 to 20% less than what you would use on winter wheat. And then on disease control, you know, it's relatively straightforward, really. Brown rust and powdery mildew are probably the most common, and they're quite easily controlled. So your fungicide costs certainly would be less, and you would spend a little bit more on growth regulation then, because obviously of the height of the crop.
And maybe just coming across to you, Conor, just in terms of, you know, drawbacks to the crop and PGR, as in Ciaran mentioned it there a second ago, is that an issue in terms of keeping the crop standing, or is there any other issues out there that growers should be aware of?
Yeah, I suppose lodging is probably the biggest issue, as we all found. Last year's harvest was quite difficult with the storms, but from talking to Gerard, he said it stood up and it was an awful lot easier to harvest than winter wheat. There was an awful lot less head loss and grains on the ground, but it just took a small bit longer to harvest because there was an awful bulk of straw going through the combine. But so lodging is the biggest issue there, and you have to be very accurate with your growth regulator application. And you're probably looking at three PGRs on the crop. The other one then is ergot there, an ergot fungus there, which would affect the grain and the head of the rye. And I suppose the biggest issue there is to incorporate rye into a good rotation and have break crops and cover crops in place, not to be continuously growing rye year after year.
Conor mentioned there the harvesting of it versus harvesting winter wheat. It doesn't go down, but it broke maybe halfway, but very little heads in the ground versus winter wheat, and it survived that storm, Emma, I think it was, a lot better than winter wheat or certainly spring barley. So, you know, if it survived that, it's fairly versatile. Now it is hard to cut. There's a lot of volume in it, and you would be going about half the speed cutting that as you will winter wheat. That is the only thing. You have serious volume in straw. So it is, harvesting isn't simple now. That would be the only thing. But look, you can't have you can't have volume, and that's just it. When you have it, and but it's just not simple. That's the only thing I would say. We'd actually, to cut one way this year, you'd actually nearly need a side knife. I didn't have one, but if you had one, I think you'd have no problems. But just be mindful. But look, that storm, like, it was as bad as one could imagine coming in August. So if it battled that, I think it's a fairly safe crop in my mind anyway.
So if a farmer then, Ciaran, is considering maybe planting winter rye for next year, as in it'll be into September 2021, what sort of preparations should the farmer be making at the moment so that they're kind of set up reasonably well to take best advantage from rye?
Well, I suppose first of all, really, is that there needs to be a market in your area. That's the first thing. So maybe to investigate that, whatever your area you're in, are the local merchants willing to take rye? That obviously would be the first thing, and have an agreement in place before you even consider growing the crop. And I suppose secondly, then, I would advise people just to go and talk to other farmers that are growing rye, like Ger. Talk to them about their experiences, and see what you can learn from them. And then I suppose finally, maybe just make sure that it does fit your sort of cropping rotation, and that, so that'd be probably the key points if you're considering it for next year.
Okay, have a look and go and see it, and keep an eye on the crop locally would be probably a great plan. Conor, I just want to come back to you, and Gerard mentioned a little bit about the markets that he had for his farm. Locally in Tipperary, is there any other markets that you're aware of there that farmers are selling into?
Yeah, there is. There's actually a number of co-ops other than the two that Gerard mentioned actually have contracts in place to take in rye and to process and put it into feed. I suppose the important thing is to maybe talk to the co-op reps and see if they actually have the contracts in place or a market for it. And I suppose a big thing that has come in the past is basically whole crop winter wheat, whole crop winter barley. I suppose whole crop rye is probably a more favourable option, both of them, as it's a higher yielder. There's more straw, there's more bulk in it, and obviously slightly cheaper to grow than winter wheat. So it is a very good whole crop option if we did come across a very dry year again. So there would be a market there for it as well.
And Ciaran, just in terms of, is there any research done in Ireland as regards feeding rye to ruminants or monogastrics or anything out there? What's the thinking?
There is some initial work done by Peadar Lawler, in a research officer there at Moore Park, on pig diets, and I suppose the conclusion there was that growth rates were excellent. These would be in finisher pigs, and that the rye could be considered a safe ingredient for use in finisher pig diets. And when they looked at the chemical analysis there, the forecast value of rye was data of about 94% of the value of wheat. So, it could be used as a substitute for wheat in finisher pig diets based on that, And I suppose also to mention, just in terms of the markets, there also is a market there for the distilling industry as well, and that's something that has been looked at, and hopefully something that will grow as well, Michael.
What we're really saying then is rye is a pretty flexible crop, both from on the farm type scenario, but also from the marketing point of view, from distilling to pigs to ruminants, and even back into whole crop, Conor, as you were saying there as well. So it looks like it's a real option for the future for farmers. Thanks very much, guys. Delighted you could join us today and have a chat about rye. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks very much.
That's all we have time for, and my thanks to Gerard, Conor and Ciaran for joining me on the podcast. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and join me next time for the latest episode of the Tillage Edge.